Do you have that coworker or friend of a friend in your life that pretty much lives in that place that constantly annoys you? And you're not even really quite sure how they got there? Sure, now you can list off a thing or two, or maybe a dozen things that bother you about them, but they just always kind of bug you. But it's unclear when or how it got to this point for you. Maybe you even think to yourself, they're really not a bad person, but despite your best efforts to get along when they come around, you brace yourself in some way, roll your eyes, or heave an internal sigh. Or maybe even an external one. Here's a likely scenario. They started off in your head as quirky, or with a trait that you labeled not your favorite. And as time wore on, that quirk or trait became more noticeable since it is, after all, a part of who they are. And the trait went from not your favorite to your very least favorite. Then that trait of theirs began to erode the rest of who they are in your mind until you only associate them with that thing they do. At some point, you may have even found other things to not care for and added those to the pile, helping you justify on some level why, by now, you simply don't like them. That part is called confirmation bias. We start looking for ways to confirm what we already believe rather than ways to challenge it. If you want to know what this is, here's some clear examples of it and how to stop this subtle relationship killer. Stick around. As always, there's a principle to sum up the concept at the end. What's happened is you have created a neuro association. You have many of them. It's how most species utilize information to quickly assess situations and how to handle them going forward. It's a deep connection your brain has made between two things. The classic example is a kid putting their hand on a piping hot stove burner and quickly learning that not only was that a terrible idea, but they even get a good idea from it. Never do that again. Now when they see a burner, they connect it with keeping their hands, and probably everything else, as far away as possible. That instance is the creation of a neuroassociation, and if other accidents happen around a stovetop in their life, it's possible for that neuroassociation to gain strength and magnitude. Essentially, it is the connection between yourself and an experience by way of thoughts and emotions. These can be extremely powerful and, while highly useful, can also end up gearing you into unproductive habits, even without you being aware it's happening. You have a favorite snack you have a tendency to eat around a particular time of day or when something stresses you out and that you know isn't good for you? That's one. It's valuable to know they can be formed without your permission. Once you're aware, you can be on the lookout for them and actually create very positive associations that end up being extraordinarily productive for what you'd really like to get out of life. There is no end of information on the web for this topic and how to utilize it for your benefit, so I'll leave you to your Googling for later and get back to the topic at hand. That individual you're not so fond of. Whatever that trait was that carved a small path in your brain and tells you that you're annoyed by them, it got deeper and stronger over time, and now just the sight or mention of them draws up negative emotions. This is particularly diabolical when it sneaks up on you with someone you actually used to enjoy. You liked hanging out or working with them for some time, and then one day they send a text or an instant message and you think, what the hell does she want? And maybe you even follow that with the thought, wow, where did that come from? It's just possible you ended the train of thought with, a cookie sounds delightful. Just me? Okay. Well, maybe you're into muffins. I'd like to pause for a moment with a clarification before going into an example to illustrate this concept. This is not a discussion about someone who has outright wronged you. We're not talking about that woman who deemed you too confident for her taste and went to work attempting to sabotage any future you might have with the company because she didn't like your face. That would be a different video, and yes, she's a real person who really pulled that stunt. This is about the guy you started out either positive or neutral on, and who has grown to be one of your least favorite people to interact with. Evil is an easy neuroassociation. Annoying is more subtle, and that's the one we have more control over. Here's the example. I worked with two guys. One was already on my team, and the other one was new to the team. Tenured guy, we'll call him 10, was interested to see what new guy, we'll call him newbie, was going to bring to the table. The trait that started this story? Newbie is chatty. Real chatty. In fact, it turns out that chatting is at the top of newbie's interests, to the occasional detriment of getting work done. To be clear, newbie is a performer and was doing well in his role despite his chattiness. 10 is not so chatty. He's the strong, silent type for the most part. His first few interactions with Newbie were, as he described it, underwhelming. I'm paraphrasing. In the beginning, as I asked my team in one-on-ones how Newbie was doing, 10 would sometimes comment, "He talks a lot." This, over a relatively short time, turned into, "He has a fantastic need to hear himself talk." Before I could catch it and stop the Neuro association, this turned into, "I avoid interacting with him as much as possible." By the time I started having deep dive conversations with 10 about how to solve for this, he'd convinced himself that it wasn't worth it, because Newbie was hopeless and wouldn't be able to change. I didn't recognize the forming of a Neuro association fast enough to help redirect it. Now that you're aware of how you got here, you can really explore the events that led you to this place and whether or not you'd like to stay in it. You might find that you're just fine not liking them, or that there just doesn't seem to be any great reason to fix it. But here's where I'm going to pull out a card you'll hear from me often. Is it productive? Allow me a brief tangent on productive. I have found that the concept of what is good and bad is largely based on context, and therefore, nothing is truly good or bad. Don't believe me? Let's take a big one. The taking of lives. Might seem a no-brainer that it's bad, most would agree with that. However, looked at from the perspective of doing so to save others, and that line might get a little blurry. Taking hostile lives to save innocent ones, and it may start to waver. Doing so to save a loved one, and it might even disappear. Whatever your stance is on what you would do when faced with a choice like that might be easy to decide when safely removed from it. But if you had to choose, it would be based on context. The surrounding events and criteria that form the statement, idea, or happening to be fully understood. At that point, it's up to you to decide right or wrong, good or bad. Or you could ask yourself if it's productive versus unproductive. This framing allows you to look at the situation more analytically. I'm going to drop the incredibly morbid topic of taking lives and get back to our much more manageable, annoying friend or coworker. Seems easier to handle now, right? Actually, before I go on, there's a great example of this in a very popular TV show, Friends. Those of you not familiar with that show, congratulations on climbing out from under that rock. Please get a streaming service or a library card. You can borrow shows from the library and absorb that legendary show. One of the main characters, Chandler, the funny one whose job is indiscernible, ends up dating someone who becomes a recurring character for the rest of the series. Her name is Janice. Chandler dates and breaks up with her more than once, and eventually she ends up popping up in extraordinarily coincidental moments, not always related to Chandler.
Janice?
And the way she's introduced each time is from off-screen, we hear her particularly distinguishable nasally New York accent.
Oh my God!
This becomes her calling card, and each time we hear it, the main characters that she encounters have a reaction that is very telling of Neuro associations. Eventually, as an audience, we develop it too. Back to your situation. So is your view of this person productive or unproductive? Put another way, could it make your job or social life even slightly easier to at least be completely neutral about this person? Don't kid yourself. The answer to that is always yes. I'm not advocating to be everybody's best friend, and I'm also not presuming they don't feel the same way about you. If you were to set out to feel better about them, it may not change their perception of you. Though odds are good you'd be subtly treating them a little bit better, and that couldn't hurt to help them come around. You're the one carrying this burden quite often, and therefore have the vested interest in changing your mind about it. If it's a coworker that gets on your nerves, think of how much smoother your job seems when they go on vacation. Really, all you need to do is send your Neuro association of them on vacation, and you can experience that every day. You live in your head with your worries, hang-ups, and stuff to do. Nobody else is in there with you. If you can relieve some of that dead weight to improve even one small part of your life, doesn't it seem worth it to just fix it and move on? There's a good chance you don't even need them to participate, since it's all based on your perspective. The principle. Recognize and understand your biases. Develop your self-awareness sufficiently to identify when patterns are being created. Identification allows for options. In this video, I referenced, is it worth it to resolve a conflict? If you haven't seen it yet, click here to find the answer and how to overcome obstacles when making that decision. Thanks for watching the video, and be sure to subscribe for more like it. Click on the notification bell to be alerted to new videos.